Hi, I'm Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. Today I've got with me Tim Wigham, and we're going to be talking about Tim's book, Moodset. We're going to be talking about leadership, high performance teams, and we've got the name of the podcast, which is Mastering Moodset to Improve Team Performance. Before we start drilling in, I always ask this question of my guests, Tim, where can people find you?
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here. People can find me on LinkedIn. So Tim Wigham on LinkedIn. I'm also on YouTube, Tim Wigham, Facebook, Tim Wigham, and then the Exceed website, so www.xcd.com. And then I also have a books website called www.inspired-books.com. So all of those places I can be found.
And your so if we wanted to buy a copy of your book, we would go to Exceed.
No, if you want to buy a copy of my book, Amazon is probably the quickest and easiest, and that's very cool and very kind if anyone is interested in my book. It's also on my website and can be bought there as well. Inspired-books.com.
So in terms of today, you've written 5 books. You've co-authored 1 book, and you've done a TED talk on Moodset as well.
Yes, indeed, sir. I have. Yes.
What an amazing 6 books. That's amazing, Tim.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tim. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a true illustration or example of marginal gains, because if I think back to 2016, I was looking to explain to people the benefits of performance coaching and the impact of coaching on a team and individuals, and taking teams from average to excellence through performance coaching. And I felt that I needed to get some thought leadership out there. I needed to get some messaging out there. And I thought, how can I do that? And I've always believed in the power of LinkedIn. And I discovered that we could put articles and messages through on LinkedIn. So I decided to do a weekly article, and I maintained that discipline. And towards the end of the first year, or 52 weeks of articles, I thought, well, what next? And I'd always been a bit stuck regarding, how does one put a book together? But a friend of mine helped me understand about self-publishing. Okay. So I was like, right, let's self-publish a book, get those first 52 insights together, and that was my first book.
So you're also ex-forces, aren't you?
Correct. Yes, I was in the Royal Marines for about 8 years in the 90s. Yes.
And so a lot of what your leadership has come from the Marines, hasn't it? In terms of your view on high performance, and then you've transferred that into business, haven't you?
Absolutely, Tim. I'd say you summed it up well there. I discovered I was privileged to be part of high performance teams in the Marines. I was privileged to be a leader in the Marines, and I, on reflection, understood the concept of servant leadership. So serving the team to succeed. Simon Sinek has actually produced some interesting books on this, working with the US Marines. So yes, my philosophy on leadership is largely built on my experience leading Royal Marines. And I have indeed tried to bring some of that philosophy with me into the commercial work environment to try and help other teams to unleash their potential.
Because ultimately you're in a situation in the Royal Marines where you're working as a team, and you have to trust each other.
Critical, absolutely critical. Trust, transparency, absolutely critical going into difficult, tough, challenging environments. It's all about teamwork, and therefore, if you don't have that foundation of trust, and you don't have the sense that you're looking after others and they're looking out for you, then you're dead in the water, aren't you? Going into a tricky situation. So absolutely.
And I think there's quite often there's a mistaken view that actually there's a top down. Actually you're working as a team within. Clearly there's a line of command, but what we've seen in the war in Ukraine is two very different armies fighting with each other, with two different leadership structures.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this sort of ties into the importance of a true sense of purpose, a true sense of meaning, a true sense of belonging, fighting for something that you're willing to die for, fighting for something that means everything to you, versus being conscripted to fight for something that is someone else's war. So yes, you're right. We're seeing those conflicting approaches for sure.
So switching gear, I think that quite in leadership we tend to understand mindsets and we tend to understand leadership. But what you've done is that you've come up with this idea about mood sets, and I love the metaphor that you talk about in the beginning of the book, where you talk about your wife's like of Dolly Parton, and you're going on a family holiday. You've got a long drive. You've got your wife and the kids in the car. What do you do to actually make the mood positive in the car? You put music on.
Correct.
And for your wife, it's Dolly Parton. I don't know what it is for your kids. It's probably changed since you wrote the book anyway. But I was sitting there and I went, oh yes, because actually the mood is really important, isn't it? If you're going to go on a long car journey, the fact that you're going to remain, you're not going to have an argument and you're going to get there and it's going to be great. It's actually the mood is central to it, isn't it?
It really is. And the epiphany really struck home for me, and I'm sure many others, during the pandemic, because all of a sudden, certainly as families, we found ourselves kind of locked up together, and spending a lot of time with each other, and creating a mood that was positive and allowed us to enjoy each other's company. I think was a challenge for many families, and it suddenly struck home to me. We talk about getting in the mood or creating the mood. Spotify even has some playlists themselves which are called mood, and the idea of basically setting the mood is similar to putting on music that you like. It lifts you up. I actually had this very example last evening. I've just come off the back of a 2-day workshop, and there was we had a busy first day yesterday, and then I needed to come into the office quite late last evening after a social event, and then do a bunch of printing in preparation for today. And I was tired, and I wasn't looking forward to it, but I thought, right, okay, hang on. Let's walk the talk here with Moodset. Let's find a song that you've recently heard and really enjoy. And I just put it on repeat. And I tell you what, it really got me out of that level of fatigue. It got me focused. I got the printing and prep done, and I got it done in a positive way, and I cracked on. And it's car journeys for me is a great metaphor, because most people can relate to that.
Yes.
A quick way to get the atmosphere in the car in the right direction is to put on a song that everyone likes, that the majority like, that you can sing along to. It just gets us out of whatever thinking that we're doing, or negative space that we might be in, into a more positive one. So no, thanks for recognizing that, Tim. And for me, it's an easy metaphor for people to.
And Dolly Parton, we always love a bit of Dolly Parton. It's
yeah. Well, this is it. Each person has their own music that they like, and this is the point that I try to convey. Convey to teams and leaders when I talk about Moodset, is that ultimately you need to be inspired to be positive, and we're all inspired by different things. And indeed, we all have different taste when it comes to music. And there's nothing wrong with basically just going with whatever your taste is. It gets you in the right mood. And then as a leader, you're then setting the right mood for your team. And to try and get that message across to leaders, for me, is absolutely vital.
So what's the difference between culture and climate?
In summary, a good friend of mine, Chris Milliner, put it to me like this: culture is your personality, which is quite difficult to change in a short space of time. Whereas climate is your mood, which actually you do have some control over when you think about it. And you have the ability to control it in a short period of time. So if you're arriving home from work, for example, and going into the house to greet your family, you actually have the opportunity and the responsibility to make sure that you're in the right mood, coming in as one of the leaders of the house, one of the parents, and presenting the right mood. Equally, for me, leaders in work environments, whether it's virtually on a virtual call or in person in the office, there's a responsibility to set the right mood for everyone else.
We've just had a piece of feedback, Tim, which is great takeaway here. Put on a favorite song to get back in the mood. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, that's very kind of Portomelo, who is a client of Exceed. She's a great servant leader herself, actually. Sort of works in the background, but works really hard to make sure that the team is set up for success. So that's very kind of Portomelo, A, to dial into this, and B, to make a comment. Thanks very much.
I've written in my notes here, leadership, language, and behavior takes focus and energy. I think all of us are in a situation where we try and be better leaders, and we're trying to be the best of people that we can. And the language that we have to use is forever changing, because I think there is a greater expectation on leaders now. I mean, 20 years ago, you could do all kinds of things, which you could never get away with now.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's important to try and keep up with appropriate language in society, of course, and in our work environments. For me, though, it's about our values. If you value being kind, then you're going to be more likely to select the right language and the right words when speaking to colleagues or direct reports or management. So if you spend some time deliberately trying to figure out your values, that is likely to then have a knock-on effect to the language that we use. We're fairly constantly reminded in the media and on the news about poor leadership, and that when there are investigations or follow-ups on this poor leadership, it often comes out that there's been some fairly ignorant language used with those individuals who felt discriminated against or bullied or whatever. So, being careful about what we say and how we say things. I think it's how we say things as well. People don't think about, it's a bit like emojis. This is how I try to explain it to people. When we're texting each other, if you just send a couple of words, it can be massively misinterpreted depending on the mood of the person receiving the message.
Yeah.
If you just take the time, though, to add an emoji of a smiley face, then the person receiving the message goes, okay, this was meant in a positive way, or this person is happy with me. So that's a way to think about it.
Yeah. Andrew says, he says that great takeaway about the song, but he said he's not so sure about Megadeth. Whereas, Andrew, I'm actually a big fan of Metallica. So if you want to put me in a good mood, I'd put Metallica on. So
it's personal. I agree completely. And thanks, Andrew. And actually joking and having a laugh is critical for mood and morale, as well, as we all know. But you make a great point, Tim. Put on the music that gets you in a positive mood, because as a leader, you're then more likely to come across as positive to your team. And one of the things I'm passionate about, because I've seen poor leadership and a poor mood set as a result. Remember when you were that newbie in the office environment and you're walking on eggshells and the boss comes in, and there's nothing worse than the boss comes into that office and is clearly in a bad mood, perhaps showing it with a frown, perhaps saying it by swearing or using a tone which is negative. And remember how that made you feel. You spend the rest of the day or a period of time on eggshells, worrying about what's coming at you, not doing your best work because you're anxious, versus the alternative, feeling that you're in a positive, warm, respectful and respected environment where all you want to do is contribute and get recognized by this inspiring leader.
Yeah,
it's so important.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you need to create a climate for excellence, but also a mood for excellence as well.
For me, they're interwoven. For me, climate is mood set. And I tell you what, Tim, the reason I came up with this word mood set is because there's been a lot of literature, a lot of talk, quite a few books about mindset. And I think mindset is critical. Mindset is ultimately how leadership sets the right mindset for a campaign or for a challenge. Method is reasonably well understood. So, for example, the aggregation of marginal gains was popularized by David Brailsford with Team Sky and British Cycling. And that's this kind of marginal gains methodology. 1% improvement on everything can make a significant step up in performance, which is fantastic. But the missing piece for me was setting the mood. It was the atmosphere, and that was less understood. So when I had this privileged opportunity to do a TED Talk in 2021, and initially my ego was leading, and I was thinking, well, shall I talk about my time in the Marines? Shall I talk about my time supporting Springbok Rugby and a few other opportunities that I've had in my life? And I realized, based on some great feedback from coaches like Bob Keeler, Derek Thompson, and others that coached me during my TED Talk period, was actually strip away the ego. This is not about what you think you've done that might be impressive to others. This was actually about what is the message that you really want people to hear based on observations in the environments in which you've worked. And for me, it was like, mindset we get, method we get, but what about mood set? What about atmosphere? What about creating the right climate for people to flourish? And we talk about the right climate for individual flair and collective flow. And for me, that sums it up quite nicely, because you don't want to take away from individuals to really showcase their creativity and their value add. But equally, if you're doing any event that involves a team, which is most of the things that we do, we need that team to flow and feel connected. So individual flair and collective flow, for me, sums up climate, which sums up mood set.
Individual
flair
and
collective flow.
Perfect. And you I think you said was in your TED Talk that happiness can improve productivity by 20%.
There's some research from there was a research done by Birmingham and Oxford universities. It was some research that I came across before my TED Talk, which proved conclusively that mood is contagious. So that was point number one, was that research has proved conclusively that mood is contagious. Unfortunately, Tim, research has shown that a bad mood spreads faster than a good mood. So
I'm sure.
A cautionary tale for all of us. There was some other research that I came across from numerous sources that happy workers, and this is research that's been done with sales teams as well as production teams on production lines, that happy workers are more productive workers. And the improvement or increase in productivity ranges from 10% to 50+%. So the average of the three pieces of research that I found was more than 20%, but I settled on 20%, which should be incentive enough for any boss, any leader, any manager to want to set the right mood and have the workforce happy.
We haven't got a lot of time left. There's only like 1.5 minutes left.
No problem.
But in your TED Talk, you talk about Nelson Mandela, and you tell the story about Nelson Mandela and the story about rugby. I think it's a great metaphor. Could you take us through that quickly?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of alliteration, first and foremost. So Mandela Moodset, I really liked. But way more important than that, Mandela is an inspirational leader in a troubled land. He inherited a country in South Africa that was on the brink of civil war. He's a true servant leader, 27 years on Robben Island, or in prison, part of that on Robben Island, who had the humility to emerge from that and look to unite a nation. And the Rugby World Cup was held in South Africa in 1995, as you may remember, and he got the country to unite together, and he set the mood basically for the Springboks to win. Now, they were seeded 9th going into that tournament. They ended up beating the All Blacks in the final to lift the trophy, which is just phenomenal. It's been turned into a movie, as you probably know, yes. Invictus. So Mandela Moodset for me is something that people might remember. It's inspiring to me, and hopefully people can tell that when I share the story. Hopefully it's a reference point that people can take forward with them as well.
And if you want to know any more about that, then check out Tim's TED Talk, and he goes into more detail about Moodset uses you actually use quite a big metaphor in terms of that, in terms of how when Nelson Mandela turned up at the ground, he had a Springbok shirt on, and the crowd went wild. I mean, it comes across in the film, doesn't it? It's like,
yes, 100%.
and immediately everybody was like, and the All Blacks rugby team is probably what
it's the benchmark.
It's the
benchmark.
it is the best team in the world. And for you to basically come and win that game was okay. You're on home soil, but that's just the way that
Mandela magic
mood lifted up.
Absolutely, Mandela magic, Mandela Moodset. He had a big impact on that, and I definitely believe he was the difference. He was the difference.
Tim, thank you so much for coming on. This is your book, Moodset. Remind people where they can get hold of it and where they can find you.
Well, firstly, I'm turning it into an audio book as we speak, so that's exciting. It will be available as an audio book in the next couple of weeks on Amazon. You can find me, if you want to see my TED Talk, just plug Tim Wigham TED Talk into Google and you'll find it. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, it's Tim Wigham. I've got inspired-books.com where all of my books are, and also xcd.com where I'm the head of performance improvement. So please find me anywhere there, reach out to me. I look forward to speaking to you in due course.
Tim, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience and your views around Moodset and high performance leadership. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
And thanks for everybody for joining in and discussing things and putting out your comments.
Much appreciated. Speak to you soon.